We're on the third floor, and it's on the main streets, right, leading to the lake. So from the third floor, you had kind of a wraparound view, and you could look out on all the tourists in this beautiful sunny days in Lake Geneva. And the reason I mentioned this was there were a lot of kind of fun and hijinks in that building. There was a time just before I got there where the FBI raided the building because there was we were doing a game at the time called Top Secret, which was one of the first games. I actually worked on the first revision of that game. I was one of the main editors. And before I got there, they had a module that I don't remember exactly what it was. It involved either the assassination of the president or the overthrow of a friendly government or something like this that had been sent back and forth through the mail and had been misrouted somehow. And somehow the FBI had gotten a hold of part of this manuscript that talked about overthrowing the government. And so they all stormed down to Lake Geneva and checked out the building and put us all under lockdown. As I said, that was just before. If I'd been hired in the spring, I'd have been part of that. But I was hired at the end of the summer. One of the other adventures we had was there were always, because we were gamers, there were always toys of various kinds around. There would be, Zeb was famous for having collections of what we call now action figures. But, there were robot toys and all sorts of toys. And there were other people that had collections of exotic plastic weaponry back in the days before the plastic weapons all had little orange barrels on the end, so you could tell the difference. But, when we were working on Top Secret, we'd hold these things up and try to figure out stats for them and that kind of stuff. And at one point, when I was not there, one evening, somebody who shall remain probably one of the Devo people was up in the third floor, kind of fooling around with this one of these plastic AK-47s, was spotted by someone on the street waving this automatic weapon around Lake Geneva, and the cops all came down, swarming the building, looking for the sniper in the old Hotel Claire on Lake Geneva. That was the kind of building that was. By the time I got there, the executive branch of the company had already moved into a completely different building. So we were, the creative division and the hobby shop was all in this one building, and the executives were on the other side of town. And that's kind of important because it ended up kind of creating a schism between the creative and the business ends of the company. As some of you may know, Gary Gygax started the company with Brian and Kevin Bloom put in money. Brian was a gamer as well, but Kevin was kind of a businessman. And even by the time I got there in 1980, there was kind of a struggle starting to go on between the business end and the creative end, with the business end thinking, well, we should start doing other things because this Dungeons and Dragons thing won't last, and Gary wanting to do what he wanted to do, and the rest of us having come in to moving the game forward. So there was kind of three factions. There was the creative division. There was Gary, who was off by himself, even though many of us were very sympathetic to him. And there was the business division, they later bought a needlework company. They sent millions of dollars to Hong Kong for figures that never actually got produced, and made other really good business decisions there. So in a roundabout way, that's leading up to a story I'm going to tell about B3. I don't know if any of you know about B3, the module that was banned and destroyed, but we'll get there in a little bit. And I will make sure that I have some time and take questions and stuff too. So I got there in 1980. I was hired on as an editor, which they call production, and I got there just in time for them to be doing a lot of their first modules on non-D&D stuff. They already had kind of a line of D&D modules that they were starting. But when I got there, they were revising Top Secret, which was an espionage role-playing game. And I was one of the editors on the revision of that. And they were revising Boot Hill, and they were revising Gamma World, and probably a couple of other things that I don't remember. And As it turned out, I was one of the only people in the production department that had any training at all, meaning I'd had a decent high school course in copywriting. So I ended up writing a lot of the back cover copy for a lot of those early modules. And cover copywriting is not really hard, but you have to be brief and you have to be direct and that kind of stuff. My cover copywriting almost led to me getting fired once. When we were working on, I got there just in time to work on what we called the magenta and blue basic and expert set, and what I guess people now call the Cook Mulvey D&D editions. And that was a really exciting time because TSR was attempting, for legal reasons, to separate AD&D from D&D and have two similar but not the same, for legal reasons, systems. And I don't remember exactly what the legal reasons are. I think it was they didn't want to pay Dave Arneson, who was no longer with the company, all the royalties on all phases of the game. So they were trying to have, well, Dave, you have the D&D system and Gary has the AD&D system, and the royalties will work out that way. I don't think that plan actually worked. Nope. But that led to some of the divergence between AD&D and what became basic, expert, and beyond D&D. But it was a great time to be there, because one of the things is there were things that bugged me as a player about the game. And suddenly, as an editor, I had a chance to fix some of them. Not all of them, but a few. We could tweak it here and there. Again, the system was that there was design, development, and then editing. And as I said, the designers would kind of rough the system in. They'd come up with great ideas. We had people like Tom Mulvey and David Cook and later Mark Akers and a lot of really brilliant designers there. And they would rough the system in, and then development would kind of take their rough stuff and fix it up and make sure it worked better. But what neither of those departments actually did was organize. So when we were doing the basic and expert set, we had all these great rules, but the designers kind of hadn't gotten it into their heads or weren't told or anything. And we, as production, we were told that these games needed to be playable by people that had never played the game before. So as the production, the editing department, we actually had to go back through the games, rearrange them, put them in order, fill in bits and pieces that were missing, which, for instance, one of the things, no offense to Zeb or Tom, who were, Zeb remains a friend, and Tom, I'm sorry he's gone, but one of the things they hadn't done was write up any descriptions of what any of the characters or classes were. So people like me got to sit down and write, elves are tall, pointy-eared humanoids, or whatever it happened to be. We wrote a lot of that kind of stuff, a lot of the connecting material, and tried to make sure that it was in an order that you could start and then comprehend, because the way most of us learned D&D back in the day, and the way people are learning D&D or Pathfinder or whatever today, was you knew someone who knew how to play it, and they taught you, rather than you picked up the book and you could figure out how to do it yourself. The early 1980s was an attempt to be able to pick up the book and do it yourself. And that, after I left TSR, we continued that trend further when I was with Pacesetter, and we actually, when we did Chill and Time Master and Star Race, we were really proud of the fact that you could literally pick up the book, go through the read me first thing, and then play the game. And in that process, you learned to play the game. And there was no, we cut out the necessity to have someone teach you, which added a certain cachet to the game. The fact that it's arcane enough that you can't just jump in kind of makes it special, but at the same time it also keeps it from a mass audience. So Harold and John Pickens and Ed Sollers and I are in the production department, and we're putting all this stuff together. And there's a deadline in the early winter, as I recall, for getting new basic and expert D&D out, for finishing it and having it delivered, because the sales department had made promises when it would be delivered, probably. And I have very clear memories of driving down to Beloit, Wisconsin, which is probably an hour or more away from Lake Geneva. And I came from the East Coast, where anything that was 10 minutes away, we didn't do it because it was just too far. Driving in the middle of winter, in the dead of night, because I think we must have left Lake Geneva around 4 a.m. getting down to Beloit at the printers, literally sitting. This is in the days, of course, before email, before mass use of the internet or any of that kind of stuff. So the way that books were produced then was there was a typesetting machine that rolled off long, what they called galleys, that were about this wide, and continuous strips. Just text, 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 text. And then you would take that film, because it was on a film-like paper, because it was photo-optical, and thankfully gotten beyond the use of hot lead that I remember from when my dad was a printer when I was a kid. And you take that roll and literally cut them apart. You put wax on the back of them, which was easier and better than rubber cement, which was the other option. And you would lay them down on on layout boards that were slightly larger than an actual piece of paper. Then you would take that, and you would photograph that, and you would make plates. But it was a long and a labor-intensive process. And as the editors, we were sitting there in the printers reading these long strips of paper. And when you found something in a long strip of paper that was wrong, you had to snip it, literally snip it out, literally cut it and paste it, which is where your cut and paste functions come from in Microsoft Word and everywhere else. That was literally the process, was cutting and pasting. So we were sitting in the printers in Beloit, working on these for days. I don't even remember how long, making the trek, and then we get back to Lake Geneva about 10 o'clock, and then we get up again in the morning and do that. And it seems like it must have been at least a week, though it blurs together, and I only distinctly remember 2 or 3 days doing that in order to get D&D out. And it was a difficult process, but it was also incredibly exciting, because at that point, everything you fix is fixed in that edition. And so that was